We are live.
Greetings. I would like to welcome everyone to the opening ceremony of our 4th annual Civility Week. My name is Dr. Ron Milan. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at the Fashion Institute of Technology. It is my absolute pleasure to be with you today. This year's theme is Civility when we need it the most. And this year, although we are virtual in our activities, we are together in spirit and we are together as a community. This year, more than ever, we need to bring civility back to our campus, to our city, to our state, and to our country and beyond. From the events from January 6th, to the incivility on the airport, to the incivility in social media, to the incivility that takes place regarding how we treat immigrants, how we treat each other, it is so important to bring civility back to where it's really needed. And it's our hope that this week, with the activities provided, that we will bring show the need to bring civility back to where it belongs. The theme of our popular Diversity Comic-Con, which is at the closing of the week, is Stop the Hate. And how appropriate is that message? And how appropriate when we have our discussion from our keynote today? Dr. Joyce F. Brown, the president of the Fashion Institute of Technology, had just provided words of welcome and to talk about the college's Social Justice Center. The purpose of the center is to foster actionable and measurable strategies to ensure the industries recognize that cultural competence is an important element for change, that diversity, equity, and inclusion enrich product development and market appeal, that responsible practices are good for businesses, the environment, and human rights, and that diverse voices in leadership roles enhance productivity and expand customer loyalty. This initiative, along with the creation of the Diversity Collective and all of the other initiatives at the college, demonstrates FIT's commitment to a just and civil society. And with that in mind, I'd like to take a moment for us to take a pledge. Take the following pledge for racial social justice. The Fashion Institute of Technology joins the people of the world in committing itself to racial justice. And so, let's pledge together by saying yes. Do you support justice, equity, equality, and compassion in human relations? Yes. Do you affirm that white privilege is unfair and harmful to those who have it and those who do not? Yes. Do you affirm that white privilege and the culture of white supremacy must be dismantled wherever it is present? Yes. Do you support racial equality, justice, and a liberation for every single person? Yes. Do you affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every single person? Yes. Therefore, from this day forward, will you strive to understand more deeply the injustice and suffering white privilege and white supremacy cause? Yes. Will you will you help transform our FIT community into a culture that is actively engaged in seeking racial justice and equality for everyone? Will you strive to understand more deeply the injustice and suffering white privilege cause in the supremacy that it causes? Yes. Will you make a greater effort to treat all people with the same respect you would expect to receive? Yes. Will you commit to developing the courage to live your beliefs and values of racial justice and equality? Yes. Will you strive daily to eliminate racial prejudice from your thoughts and actions so that you can better promote the racial justice efforts of the FIT community? Yes. Will you renew and honor this pledge daily, knowing that our school, our city, our state, our nation, and our world will be a better place because of your efforts, our efforts. Yes. I'd like to thank my church, St. Francis Xavier, for allowing me to use this pledge that we use every Sunday. So thank you. Now it gives me such great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Yolanda is no stranger to the FIT community. She has given workshops on inclusive teaching and provided remarks not too long ago for our Black History Month. Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz is an award-winning associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. Her research focuses on racial literacy and teacher education, Black girl literacies, and Black and Latinx male high school students. A sought-after speaker on issues of race, cultural responsive pedagogy, and diversity, Sealey-Ruiz works with K-9 in higher education school communities to increase their racial literacy knowledge and work toward a more equitable school experiences for Black and Latinx students. She's been on TV, she's been in documentaries, she's been with Spike Lee's Two Fists Up, We're Gonna Be All Right. And she's a great publisher as well. And Dr. Sealey-Ruiz wrote a book now 2 years ago now almost, The Vortex and Other Poems, dealing with the love from the vortex in other poems, which is a dynamic book about love and the importance of love. And in July of 2021, her second book, The Peace Chronicles, came out. And let me tell you, it's unbelievable. And if you're not into poetry, you will be into poetry when you read her book. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend and my academic sister, who I care about so greatly, Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz. Doctor.
Wow. Good morning, community. Good morning, my brother, Ron. Thank you for inviting me here, inviting me back. But I want to thank you for the work that you're doing in the FIT community because, folks see your outward work, but perhaps they don't get a chance to talk to you much about your heart. And I get a chance to. I get a chance to listen to you as you talk about the deep commitment that you have to making sure that the FIT community fulfills all of those things that you just mentioned. That you think and you work tirelessly because of the love that you have for the FIT community and the students and your colleagues. And so I thank you for inviting me to be a part of that, your heart vision, your head vision, and to speak with all of you today about civility and, of course, about love, which is one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll be conscious of time. Ron, please let me know, perhaps by texting, letting me know when I have about 5 minutes left. One thing I want to say is that this may not be a typical keynote. This is a keynote where it will be interactive. So I'm going to ask you now to get a piece of paper, a pen, a pencil, perhaps open up a space on your phone or on your computer where you will take notes for yourself as a form of reflection. So this will be quite interactive. And the idea is for us to take a moment for us. Um, Dr. Ron talked about how difficult, and we all know how difficult these last 18, 19 months have been. And it is rare that we take a moment to pause for ourselves. And so I want this to be a meditation, if you will, today as I share some things. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What you will see, I'm a bit transparent. My screen has a lot going on. It's a little messy, so forgive that. As I launch into the talk this morning, this interactive talk, healing ourselves, loving ourselves as we learn and serve others. And so this is a message that I bring to the FIT community, to staff, to faculty, and eventually to students as well. I want to begin by recognizing that I am on the unceded territory of the Wappinger and the Lenni Lenape peoples, here on Turtle Island, also known as Manhattan, but specifically in Harlem on Columbia University's campus. And while there were 14 First Nations tribes that cultivated this land and inhabited this land, it was predominated by the Wappinger and the Lenape peoples. And I pay homage to those First Nations brothers and sisters. May we always remember. So here's the first interactive question. I'm going to use my cell phone just to give us a minute or so. I'm going to put 1 minute on my clock, and I want you to really be honest and open and vulnerable. What are you releasing today, or what do you need to release today? There's so much that we carry. Let's see if we can release within these next 50 minutes together. And I have started our 1 minute clock. If we were together in a room, or if we were together in more of an intimate space, you know, I'm learning to have, learning that intimacy can be cultivated on Zoom and online. We would be talking with each other. But speak with yourself right now. Lean into your own voice. What are you releasing today? To get the sound right. Thank you for that. So this is Civility Week at FIT, and so quite naturally, as a words person, I go to dictionaries, I look for quotable quotes, and there are so many on the topic of civility, because we need to cultivate it, you know, as fellow human beings, as Americans. But I want to also let this be interactive, and I'm going to be silent and give you an opportunity to focus or gravitate to one of the quotes and just talk about what resonates for you. Is it what Van Jones is offering, Sandra Day O'Connor, President Barack Obama, or Ann Landers? This idea of civility, which I purposely did not put the definition, only the word, and this is the interpretation from these four great folks. Which one do you relate to or resonates with you the most? Just put 1 minute on the clock for us. What I'm hoping is that the quote that you resonated with the most, you'll carry that with you for the week, and that the invitations that I offer this morning, they'll resonate with you over the week as you interact with the different activities that are planned for campus. So not to put you on the spot, Ron, but I want to quote you when we were having a conversation about a week or two ago, you said many profound things. But one of the most powerful statements you made that I heard that day that really resonated with me is that you said you can't be civil if you're in pain. And we could do an entire workshop, right, on that. We can think about our own pain, examining the pain of others. It is not an excuse for people's bad behavior, but perhaps it offers or opens up some empathy when, and the saying that we've all heard, you know, hurt people, healed people, heal people. But I want to thank you for this, Ron, because when you said this, it gave me the focus of what I really wanted to talk about today. And here's our path, what I'm hoping. We had our check-in. I want to talk a little bit or share with you a little bit about the idea of the source of self-regard, to have you explore a little bit of your own pain, pleasure, and peace by tapping into your own story, listening to yourself. I'd like to read perhaps two brief poems as I give an example from my own life of how I find peace in these moments of chaos and oftentimes lack of civility that I experience, that we all experience, sometimes from colleagues and from others in the world. And if we have time, I would love to end with a musical meditation, just to have us breathe together and to go forth into the day, just being grounded in a very brief sit. So the source of self-regard, I'm going to play a very brief video from Toni Morrison. I'm actually going to play it twice because the sound quality is not perfect. And I also just want you to first listen to what Toni says, Sister Elder Toni, I call her, and then perhaps on the second go round, just sort of look at her body and the stance that she takes.
Yolanda, I think the sound is not coming through.
Oh, the sound is not coming through? Is that what,
Let's try.
as you said, the sound is not coming through? Hmm.
It's Rick. If you want to, yeah, if you start sharing again and just make sure that little speaker icon is selected.
Sure.
Sorry.
Oh no, and it says automatically optimized, so it is selected. We can try it one more time.
Yeah, give it another shot here.
And if for some reason, I have to now locate my presentation. If for some reason, sorry for the messiness of my desktop, this is how my brain works. If for some reason it doesn't show up, then I will just talk about what she was saying in the video. Just give me one moment, please, while I call up the presentation. Okay, I have located it, and let me share one more time, and let's see what happens. Okay. Is it coming through?
No.
Unfortunately, still not hearing it this time.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and stop and what she let me just stop for a moment. What she was saying, Bill Moyers asked her this question, as you think about the inner city, what phrase comes to mind? And she said, love. We have to learn to love ourselves. And she goes on to quote James Baldwin in a conversation that she had with him. And James Baldwin told her, you know, your ancestors have already given it up for you. You can now love yourself. You can now love yourself. So the question that I want us to think about as we think about this idea of the source of self-regard, how do we sometimes not love ourselves? Times as we get so mired into perhaps the work that we have, whether it's work around our homes, work in the community, work in the school setting, our teaching, if we're not in the classroom, the staff work that we do to keep everything running. right? And sometimes we neglect ourselves. And one thing I want to do is just first of all share, if you've not read anything by Toni Morrison, this may be a beautiful introduction to her essays, her speeches and meditations before you delve into her novels. And she really has some very powerful works that talks about self-love, talks about her relationships and how she had loving friendships. And she also talks about the ways in which we don't love ourselves. And so with that, I want to bring in Bobby Summer. And Bobby Summer shared that having a low opinion of yourself is not modesty, it's self-destruction. Holding your uniqueness in high regard is not egotism, it's a necessary precondition to happiness and success. And although many of us may not walk around and say, you know, publicly that we have a low opinion of ourselves, and not eating healthy, or not stopping to eat at all, working through the day, not getting proper rest in the evening, other habits that we engage with. There are different ways that we show low self-regard. I also talk about this quote a lot with folks who have grown up in a religious household. And particularly, I can only speak to the Christian tradition where Christ is modeled for us. And oftentimes, if there is a sticky situation, we would be asked as very early as children, what would Christ do? And so Christ is seen as a self-sacrificing person, and that was the behavior we were to model. In my case, I was the youngest, also grew up in a Christian household. So I was to defer to my brothers and sisters who were older and also try to model great Christian behavior. And how that manifested as I grew older through my marriage, through my mothering, through my daughtering, is that I often put people first. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? It really isn't anything wrong with that unless it becomes a detrimental habit, that you put others before yourself so much that it damages your health, or it damages your psychological well-being, or you become actually resentful towards people and towards yourself. And so this idea of not seeing our uniqueness, not recognizing our beauty, not recognizing our greatness, and particularly for people of color in a society that is bent on telling you the opposite, that you are not beautiful, that you are not smart, that you do not deserve rest. It becomes a challenge, right, to declare that. But in these times that we are in, and particularly those of us in education who are serving others, who are sometimes upholding systems that are not equitable, we have to find ways of loving ourselves, respecting ourselves, and also challenging ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that with the work I do in my theory, The Arc of Self. But since we're in New York, pigeons abound. So these two little pigeons I bring into the space to help us think a little bit deeper about this idea of self-regard and what it is not. And so the pigeon in the red hat is asking the pigeon in the black cap, the academic cap, which is interesting in and of itself, right? What is the opposite of self-regard? And the pigeon responds self-abandonment, self-forgetfulness, selflessness, unselfishness, dissatisfaction, and sadness. And so I want you to take a moment, just a couple of seconds on the paper or the screen that you've been jotting things down. How do you perhaps practice a lack of self-regard? How do you perhaps practice a lack of self-regard? That's the first question I want you to answer. I'll give us about 30 seconds for that reflection. And please be as honest as you can. This is for your benefit to focus on you these next couple of minutes. How are you not practicing self-regard? Okay, and just take a pause there. And now I want to give you another 30 seconds to reflect on this question. What can you do to change that? What can you do to change your practice of lack of self-regard or low self-regard? Just jot down some ideas. It could be a practice you already have, have in motion. It could be aspirational. Maybe you're someone like me who would forget to take my medication for high blood pressure. There's different ways, sometimes explicit and sometimes a bit subtle. But what can you do to change that? So here is my model. I've been writing about the idea and the theory around racial literacy development for a couple of years now. I think I entered into this conversation in the field in 2011. It's a field that dates back to 2003, coming out of sociology, specifically Frances Windance Twine, then coming in through legal studies, critical legal studies, with a 2004 article from Lonnie Guinier entitled From Racial Liberalism to Racial Literacy. And since that time, folks in my field, the field of English education, urban education, write about this idea of developing skills to be able to constructively talk about race and class and gender and the isms and the phobias that plague us. And so I was writing about it for a number of years, and about 3 years ago, with the help of my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Angel Acosta, created this visual and created these, what I call the 6 components of racial literacy development. What I will say about 2 things I'd like to say, 3 things. Number 1, you will notice that it is rooted in critical love. And the love that I'm theorizing is this love of liberation, the freeing of ourselves from stereotypes, stereotypical notions, racist beliefs, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-Blackness, these beliefs that we are socialized to think as normal because we have been 400 years in a society that has scripted some to be less human than others. And specifically when I talk with teachers or faculty, I want them to engage in that critical love for themselves, but also their students, to help their students disentangle from the deficit narratives, particularly their Black and brown and poor students that have been written about them. The second thing I'll say is that each of these components is its own workshop experience. And the third thing I'll say is to focus on the archeology of the self, that the archeology of the self is actually we, the self, our bodies, our minds, our souls, our spirits. We are the ones, we're the tool that engages in critical love and critical humility and critical reflection. Historical literacy, I opened up with a land acknowledgement. It's important for us to understand how our society has come to be, how the communities where we serve, the FIT community, the neighborhood surrounding it, who lives there, how that particular neighborhood came to be versus other neighborhoods. And then my goal always is, as we build this critical consciousness, this desire, this need, this impetus for social justice in our spirits and in our hearts, that we will naturally interrupt racist and inequitable systems when we see them. But I want to pivot back to us and this idea of caring for ourselves. And I want to bring in Sister Audre Lorde, incredible feminist, lesbian, scholar, writer, poet, incredible thinker. And she said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And she was specifically talking about Black women at this time in the 70s and 80s. If you look historically, you know that Black women have been the root, the bedrock of the civil rights movement. And they were not always acknowledged or recognized for that. And usually, Black women would be in this sort of cycle of service, you know, putting their bodies, their minds on raising their children, serving the movement, taking care of their partners at home. And so when Audre Lorde says this, she's really making a powerful statement, because this idea of self-care was not everyday talk among women who were trying to push for social justice and civil rights for their people. And so she said, we have to declare. And that in fact, when you do declare self-care, that it is an act of political warfare. You are arming yourself so that you can sustain the battle that is ahead. And so we can look at that, whether it's in social justice movements or the work that we do within classrooms, the work we do within our own communities, that if we, as Dr. Ron said, it is very difficult to be civil when you're in pain. It is very difficult to sustain a fight for justice when you're always tired. So how do we care for ourselves? And how do we care for ourselves if we're going to be honest in the face of what this world has produced in the past 400 years? Although movements have changed things, we still have a society where January 6th can happen. We still have a society where we can witness the death of a man being asphyxiated for 9 minutes on video. And we also are moving about and living in the world where we have had our own childhood trauma. And so the ACEs study, many of you may know this, particularly the psychologists and psychiatrists and those in the mental health and mental wellness fields on the call here. But the ACEs study was pretty groundbreaking at the time, because you had psychologists who were saying that children, they're not performing in school in particular ways because they're dealing with trauma, right? And what's interesting is that if you look at my slide, you'll see that it was mostly white, middle class for the most part, relatively educated folks who were part of the study. So if there were more inclusive voices, I imagine the numbers would be higher. Right? The numbers would be different. And what we're seeing now, this turn in education, and it is hitting higher education, but predominantly in K through 12, there's a turn in education that's healing centered, trauma informed education. And so there's monies, billions of dollars coming out of Washington in terms of focus on education to talk about equity, yes, but to also talk about trauma informed education or healing centered practices. And these are practices that I argue that we must have at the higher education level as well. And you're going to begin to see and hear more of this kind of language. Sorry for the sirens. So not to go deep into the ACEs study, but it's also an opportunity for us to not to be re-triggered in any way, but to also recognize, I'm sorry, how far we have come in our own healing, And I'm hoping that people are in the process of healing or seeking to heal. But what the ACEs study told us is that 52 of the respondents, over half in the study, reported at least one or more adverse childhood experience. And those that had more than one, look how the numbers ballooned. And those that have more than one, there is the likelihood for them to have health issues, for them to engage in smoking and alcohol and suicide attempts. And those with 4 or more ACEs are at a much higher risk for poor health that can lead to diabetes. Thank you, Richard. Stroke, heart disease. And so as we do this self-work, it's important for us to do our own self-work as we interact with the students in the FIT community. And to recognize that, like us, they too may have come from backgrounds where there was housing and food insecurity, that there were adverse childhood conditions, that they may be living with adverse conditions now as young adults, the unequal access to healthcare, to mental health services, the unemployment that is rampant in some communities, unequal access to early childhood programming, highly qualified teachers, and overall bias that they experience. And so how can the FIT community be a space of belonging and welcoming for students? It will be that when we make it for ourselves. when it becomes the ethos of what the FIT community is, that a child will walk in, a young person will walk in and know that that community is one that sees them and hears them and recognizes them, regardless of what their backgrounds are. And as we look at these concentric circles, we see the interrelation of our home lives, communities, families, intertwined with schools, intertwined with societal conditions. And here we are, for those of you who are in the classroom, here we are in the midst of all of this, navigating this, our own lives, and trying to hopefully help our students navigate it in their lives. And we have to recognize, you know, as we talk about inequality around sexual orientation and gender bias and so forth, race, as Toni Morrison reminded us, is something that we've all lived with. Norman Rockwell painted the problem we all live with. And she reminds us that I have never lived, nor have you, in a world in which race did not matter. And unfortunately, the way that race has been scripted in our society from 400 years ago in 1619, it reverberates now. And these scripts about who is more human than others, who deserves certain things in healthcare and education, that impacts the way we do our work. It impacts our belief system. This is why archaeology of the self is important to engage with, because we have all been socialized generationally to believe some of the scripts that are out there. And so we have to engage in this self-work. We live in a time in 2021 that some groups, like those that I belong to, are still insisting that our lives matter. And so it's important, given that context. And as I think about Brother Ron, there was something where when you talked about white privilege or white supremacy, white privilege, I think, that it harms everyone. That's what Norman Rockwell said when he painted the problem, when he painted Ruby Bridges, who integrated New Orleans school at the age of 6 in 1960. And the venom that was hurled at this 6-year-old child, that really was an eyesore for our society. That showed us exactly where we were in terms of this idea of race. We know that race is a social construction, but it does have very real outcomes for people. And so knowing the context that we're in, moving through this pandemic that we are still navigating, having experienced this collective trauma of seeing people's lives being lost on a daily basis, seeing people in our own families' lives being lost, seeing schools turned upside down, it is so important that we define some form of self-care for ourselves. And I just want you to take a moment. What is this notion of self-care? Some folks, depending on, like I mentioned, their backgrounds, their birth order, there's many reasons why this is a foreign concept to folks. How do we make it not in a commodified way? Burn your incense, take your bubble bath, you know, buy these oils. And that might be helpful for some people. But when I'm talking about self-care, I'm talking about psychological, emotional, physical. So I want you to take 1 minute. What are your notions about self-care? And to make it as personal as you can. Not self-care for others, but self-care for you. Let me just give you a moment to reflect. It is my hope that as you move through the activities for Civility Week in smaller groups or larger groups, that you will bring in some of these reflections and have your voice be heard, lift up your experiences as we learn to be civil, more civil, and quite frankly, human with one another. So what are your notions about self-care? How are you practicing it, or how would you like to practice it more? Just want to get the sound right. Something so mellow about that. So as diverse as we are the ideas of self-care. For some, it is completely resting, shutting down, perhaps engaging in meditation or silent retreats. For others, it's what they eat or what we eat. For others, it's self-awareness and control, or being physically active, resting the mind, sleeping, being very deliberate about the choices you make about friendships, partnerships. And so as there's 7 pillars here, there could be 14, there could be 3. This is not a definitive chart, but just a schemata I picked off the internet. But I want you to just take a moment to take this in and just consider these 7 pillars. What do you need to improve? Again, thinking about having us try to restore our wholeness as much as possible. When whole beings show up to spaces, I think people are happier. And individual healing is important, but also our collective healing is important. So what do you need to improve? Just jot down a few things. Maybe you're already engaged with this. I hope you are. Maybe there's some things on this chart you need to eliminate. But one thing I will say is that you have to be generous and gentle with yourself, particularly now in the times that we are in, and to be generous and gentle with students. I have students, one student in particular, who nearly died from the COVID. And he's at a point where he now looks up, he has 4 incompletes, and he wants to move forward with his certification exams. And so I'm trying to do both and with him, right? Both to understand what he experienced, almost losing his life to COVID-19, and understand he has expressed a desire that he wants to continue with the doctorate. So how do I show compassion, empathy to help move him along in this process? Well, first and foremost, I have to have compassion and empathy for myself in order for me to be able to be generous to someone else, or to be generous with my students. This is the pyramid reconceptualized as the tool focusing on archaeology of self. Again, ourselves, we are the tools that engage with this deep excavation and exploration of our beliefs and biases and ideas that dramatically and directly impact the way that we engage with our work. And when I talk about work, I'm talking about within the FIT community. I'm also talking about work within our families and within our communities. And if you really listen deeply and took that pledge, as Dr. Ron was calling them off, you know the self-work that is involved for you to get to the point of realizing that pledge and living out what that pledge requires. And so we have to begin by telling our stories. Our stories are so important. We have to allow space for our students to tell their stories. Sometimes it's stories of pain, but we are more than our pain. And sometimes it's stories of fear, stories of victory. How do we make space to tell our stories? And I wanted to do something a little bit fun in these last couple of minutes. I have some interactive slides. I just love images of all people, but particularly Black girls and women. So I just picked out some of my favorite. And I want you to think about something that you might be thinking, what is she talking about? But I want you to think about how you dress. And I share that story just quickly by saying there was a point that I think I probably wore black, and I love the color black, but it was more an indication of my mood and where I was. in my life. And it was just easy because I was not feeling so great about myself. I had my standard black pants, my black top, and maybe I'll put like a blazer on top, my standard black shoes, and I just kept going. And my dear friend, Dr. Goldie Muhammad, she would say, I'm noticing, Sissy, that you are like wearing, well, she knew me intimately enough to say, you're wearing kind of the same thing over and over. What's going on? And in some ways, she was duplicating that kind of behavior. We were in a hurry, we were rushing. There were a lot of things going on. The things that were happening in the vortex for me was some of the things I was living out. And we made a commitment to ourselves that for 1 year, we were only going to wear colors, bright colors. Now we could, yes, wear black or navy on the bottom, but we committed to that. And I have to tell you, if you see now, my nails, my earrings, I move in very, very bright colors. And it is also not surprising because I am at peace in my life right now, in spite of the things that go on. So answer this question. Do you think there is a connection between what colors you wear and your wellness? That's just a yes or no. I want us to make a couple of lists now. I'm going to move a little bit faster, but I also want to say that I'm sharing this, that I hope you'll find some value in it to bring into your own classrooms or to bring into meetings, bring into the community. This is what, empathy and understanding helps to foster civility. When we know each other a little bit more about our stories, we're a bit more patient with one another. So here's the list. I want you to think about what causes you pain. This is really like quick jotting down. Who causes you pain? What causes you pain? Who causes you pain? What songs, or perhaps you look at artwork, but in this case, what songs, what music do you listen to during your painful moments? Which years did you experience the most pain? And what is a painful moment from which you need to heal? Just jotting things down, or maybe you're not participating, maybe you're just taking in what I'm offering. And the same thing with pleasure, right? Adrienne Maree Brown talks about the pleasure principle in research, talking about how we look at our work and find pleasure in our work. What causes you pleasure? Who brings you pleasure? Perhaps you're answering this as I'm asking the question. What songs, what music do you listen to during your pleasurable moments? Maybe that's music you can bring into the classroom. Maybe that's music even when you're not experiencing the pleasure. Maybe the music can help evoke feelings of pleasure. And which years did you experience the most pleasure? And what is a moment of pleasure currently that you have experienced? And I know it may be strange that I'm asking about pleasure in the midst of so much of what's going on, but we have to be able to cultivate our joy and cultivate our peace, even in moments of just unsettling times. And speaking of peace, what brings you peace? Who brings you peace? What songs do you listen to at your most peaceful moments? Which years did you experience the most peace? And what is a current moment of peace that you are experiencing or have experienced recently? Let us claim that. Let us claim peace. Thank you, Richard. Let us claim pleasure, even in the midst of our pain. And so Sister Elder Toni Morrison, you'll see that she comes up several times. I carry her with me in all of my work. She said that freeing, in her book, Beloved, she wrote that freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. And so I ask you today, what do you still need to free yourself from? And so what I want you to see is that, again, if we were together, if we had 2 or 3 hours together, we would be processing these questions, speaking with each other, engaging in the process of healing. This is what can be done little by little in meetings. You can begin to do this kind of work in the classrooms. What do you still need to free yourself from? Is there some insecurity that you're holding deeply, some confusion? Do you choose to be oblivious to the things that are happening because it's easier to move in oblivion than it is in reality? And are you harboring some fear? So I would say just choose one of those and answer that. And as we move, or as I move towards the end, I just want to share that it's very difficult for me to ask folks to engage in something that I have not engaged in myself. And so archaeology of self is the way that I live my life. I constantly question, who am I as a daughter? Who am I as a mother, as I live in a household of 3 generations, right? With my mom, who's 83, my daughter, who's 16. Should I choose to love again? What are my beliefs around love? I've experienced, sure, heartache, we all have, but I've also experienced joy, and love is worth it. So I happen to use writing. I mean, many of us might have different outlets: meditation, music, prayer, exercise. For me, I write to free and heal myself. And so Love from the Vortex, as Dr. Ron mentioned, really was this is my artifact from my archaeological dig around love and intimacy. It is a documentation of my journey to self-knowledge, my journey to self-care and to self-love. And it has been an incredible gift that continues to give. And as it has given me, I seek to try to share that with others. There's an Instagram show that I created where I interviewed some of the scholars in the field that you might know, asking them about what is love to them. And we read poetry together, 20 episodes of that. I've created candles. It took me 48 hours. I read the entire book. I commissioned a song, an original song for the Audible. And what is most beautiful for me is to see young people. There's a group of young college students and high school juniors and seniors and their teacher advisor who have, for the last year, have been writing a curriculum on the book. And so trying to create a curriculum by young people for young people to normalize the discussion of love in classrooms is something I could have never dreamed of. And I'm so grateful for that. And as Dr. Ron mentioned, my second book of poetry, The Peace Chronicles, Coming Out of the Vortex and Into Peace, this was my continual work. And I still continue to work on my piece. In spite of all the uncertainty that happens at my institution, the uncertainty that happens in the home of living with someone older than I am and younger than I am. And yet it is important for me to find my peace so that when I go into the classroom on Wednesdays, I do not bring my confusion and chaos, that I want to show up authentically as peaceful so that I can share that peace, that meta with my students. And again, the gift that keeps giving, Love from the Vortex was featured at the Teachers College Macy Gallery this past July. And right now, if you are in New York City and you meet all COVID requirements, there are 2 wonderful exhibits at the Macy Gallery, and one is dedicated to Love from the Vortex and the Peace Chronicles. It is a multimodal exhibit featuring video from the artist of the cover of the Peace Chronicles, music, the artwork that is inside of the book, and testimonies from folks who have read the book. And all of this, I want to end by saying, we have this light already within us. And Amanda Gorman, I think quite beautifully in her final stanza of her inauguration poem, she said that there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I say that now is the time that we find the courage to be light to one another, to live out the pledge that Dr. Ron invited us to take quite seriously, and to have that permeate in the FIT community so that it can spill out into the outside of the community, the building, outside of the buildings that make up FIT. There is always light if we are brave enough to be it and to see it. And these are just some other examples. I think that was a little out of order. But I want to ask you as we end, I want you to be very deliberate if you can about your healing. What are you healing from? What is healing to you? What are you trying to heal? And it might be multiple things. Remember the ACEs study, but being gentle and generous with yourself, focus on one thing that you're trying to heal. And I'm just sharing some tools with you that can be found on the internet. There's so many tools, specifically by the Olga Phoenix Institute. These are tools that I use, that I share with my students in my classroom, to have them think about their own self-care from a physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, and professional. There's also self-care that can be financial. So this can be expanded. And then I share with them some examples, because again, depending on culture or age or experiences, this idea of self-care for some people is non-existent. So they may need some scaffolding. So I try to offer examples. I create other tools for them and for myself, like a self-care and stress management plan, right? And really being deliberate about engaging in my self-care and inviting my students who are going to be teachers of other people's children to engage in their own self-care. And these are just some other activities, just being transparent with you, some of the tools that are available and some of the tools that I have used as I continue to engage in archaeology of the self. And there's different ways to heal. People take different approaches. These are some examples from my own life: prayer and meditation and a healthy diet. Therapy is very important to me. And I want to remind you that you got to nourish to flourish. That yes, you have to keep forward with the mission and the vision of FIT and your sphere of influence. But if you are not well and you are not whole, it is very difficult to do that work. And we only have 2 minutes left, so we don't necessarily have time for this sit, a full sit, but I would like to take, of those 2 minutes, just 1 minute, to introduce you to this musical meditation by India Ari that hopefully you will turn back to. But you know what? I'm not going to play it because the sound didn't play earlier. So on that, I'm going to stop right on time. And thank you so much for your graciousness and listening to what I offer. See these as invitations. And I thank you, Brother Ron, for inviting me into the FIT home, community, and family once again.
Yolanda, thank you so very, very much. Every time we talk, it's a healing process for me too, because I believe that when we share ideas, we grow, and growth is healing as well. So I want to say thank you, and I'll be glad to share that link to that NDRE video. I would be glad to share that for
Wonderful.
others so they can watch that.
And
I just
send the other slides too. I can, because what I really wanted to do was just take, we didn't have a lot of time, but I wanted to come with some offerings. And there is something else I'd like to offer as a gift, Ron, that I'll put in the email to you. I just finished with my friend and partner, Dr. Angel Acosta. We had a 5-day healing-centered education summit. And so there are about 30 meditations, interviews from leaders in the field on mindfulness, a healing-centered education, and an audio community garden. And I want to share that link so you can share it with the community, and they can just listen at their leisure.
We appreciate that very much, Yolanda. We definitely appreciate your message. We appreciate you and your voice to our community. You're always welcome to the FIT community. I said to you before that you're part of the FIT family as well. And I want to say to everyone that people who were not able to see today's session, it is recorded and it will be available online during the week, Civility Week. But Yolanda, thank you so very much for coming, for being with us, and for helping us to heal during this time when we really need it the most. So thank you so much. And I want to thank the audience for being here and supporting the start of the fourth annual Civility Week. There's lots of events coming up. And at the end will be our Diversity Comic-Con on Friday and Saturday as well. So that should be fun as well. So thank you so very much. And everyone have a wonderful day and enjoy this week's activities. Yolanda, thank you so very much.
See you soon, Dr. Ron.
You got it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.